Hello, welcome to the lesson. So what we're going to be doing for this one is we're going to be going over typography and how to work with it and how to edit it within a project. Because one of the great things about InDesign is it has a lot of functions, so you can really tweak a font to how you want it to look or how you want it to play into your design, so you're not just stuck with what the font is as its default. So we're going to go over things like how to edit your tracking, how to work with your leading, how to change the space between paragraphs, how to work with the text as a whole, like how to make it into separate columns, things like that. And we'll go over how to work with glyphs and whatnot. So first up is what we're going to do is we're going to go into that lesson 5 folder that you would have downloaded, and there should just be a start file in there. Just open it up, and you should have a project like this in there. So first thing is we're going to mess with the text down here. Make sure you have your paragraph panel open. I just have mine floating off to the side right now. If you don't have that either already floating out here, or if it's not off to your right, you can go to Window, Type in Tables, and Paragraph should be in there. We'll also be using the character panel, but that will come in later when we go in to change the font. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to work in this chocolate covered strawberries section, and I'm going to select the recipe here. So I'm going to select from 1.5 pound strawberries with stems all the way down to protein 0 grams. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the space after field. If you look in your paragraph panel, it's going to be in the second column, third one down. What we're going to be changing is we're basically telling InDesign how much space to be put in after you have a line break. So we're going to be changing the space between here and here, basically. So go over here. I'm just going to hit up once on my keyboard. So just your arrow key, hit the up once, and it should automatically put 0.625 in there. If not, just go ahead and just type in 0.0625, and you should see the space grow between each individual line. And if you deselect it, you'll see that it gives us that overset error. That's fine. We're going to change that in a little bit when we add in a second column and mess with the font a little bit more. Okay, next up is I'm going to go over fonts a little bit. So far when I've had you guys change fonts, or when I've had you add a font, I've just had you bring up your type tool and then go up in the control panel up here and change your font this way. Another way to change your font is if you go to the character panel. Again, just Window, Type in Tables, Character. You can also change your font settings, like your font size, your tracking, your kerning, things like that. All that is in this little panel here. Everything is up here in the control panel as well, but this is a bit more condensed, so either way you can change your fonts this way. Something I'm going to bring up is if you guys have a current subscription to Adobe, is when you go to your fonts, there should be a Find More button. If you hit that, that has a bunch of Adobe fonts that they just have stored in their font store, I guess. If you have a subscription, all of these fonts are included in that. If you don't have the subscription, I think you can buy the fonts individually, but if you have the subscriptions, they're just included, and you can download the fonts they have available onto your device. If you have the subscription and you're able, if you just start typing up in this area up here, I'm going to type in Adobe Caslon Pro, and we're going to want regular. Now, in order to add it to your device, you're just going to click on the cloud over here, and it will let you activate it, so it'll be included on your device. I've already got it activated, so you can see next to Caslon Pro, if I move my mouse off of it, you can see my cloud has a little check mark in it. That's just telling me that I've already downloaded it. To see what it looks like if you don't have it on your computer, you can see on that first one there, Caslon Pro bold, it just has the normal cloud. That means that I have to activate it, but you just click on the cloud and it'll ask me if I want to activate it, and I just hit OK. And it might take a minute, but after it's done, you can see it get a notification that cloud turns from a normal cloud to a cloud with a check mark on it. I want you guys to activate the Adobe Caslon Pro regular and add it to your device if you can. If you can't and you don't have it installed on your device, when we go to change the font to that Calson, you can use Athleus. That's going to be similar enough to the Calson Pro that you should get a similar design to what we have. So every time I say Caslon Pro, go ahead and add that Athleus if you don't have the font I'm talking about. That should be a good substitute. Okay, another nice thing that I really like about their new font selection is there's a way for you to filter out some of these fonts. So if you're looking for a specific look, if I go to this first button here, it gives me a bunch of different properties that I can filter the fonts into. And this comes in handy if you're like me and you have a bajillion fonts. Rather than having to go through them each one by one, if I have an idea of what I want the font to look like, I can pick, like if I know I want the font to be serif, I can click that and it will only include the ones that are serifed. If I want a really heavy font, I can select heavyweight and it will put those in there. You can pick a font where if you want it to be very uniform and you want it to be an even width, you can select that. Or if you want something that's a bit more decorative and you want a varying width, you can do that and it gives you some options. So, or if I want to do a like handwritten type of font, I can pick that option and it'll give me a bunch of fonts that match that criteria. Another one here is decorative, so this is your really fancy, artsy kind of fonts. So you can always go through there, and if you don't know specifically what kind of font you want to use, but you know what the font should look like, you can select these different criteria and go through and just find the specific font you want. And this filtering also works in the Find More section. So if you don't want to go through the hundreds and thousands of fonts that Adobe has to offer, you can just set up your filters and it will give you the fonts that they offer that match that criteria. So that's another nice thing in here. Something else I'm going to bring up is there are two types of fonts. There's open type fonts, and then there's true type fonts. And you can tell by looking in this last column here, some of these have an O, like this one here, and some of them have a TT. The O stands for open type, and then the TT stand for true type. Design-wise, there's not a huge difference between the two. It's just true type was made by Macintosh, so that was their font. And then open type is a newer file format. These guys were made by Adobe and Microsoft working together. So this was the competitor to the true type fonts that Apple released. Functionality wise, there's not a big difference between the two. Open type fonts usually have more characters to work with, and they have more glyphs and things like that, but at the end of the day, there's not a really big difference between the two. They're just different kinds of file formats. The Calson Pro that we'll be working with, that's an open type font, and you'll see that it has a bunch of characters like past just what your keyboard has. But again, there's not a very big difference between the two, and you don't have to worry about whether a font is true type or open type. As long as it's installed in your computer and it does what you need it to do. That's all that matters. Okay, next up is I'm going to go up to this section here that says strawberries, and I'm going to just select this entire title here, and I want to change the font of it, and I'm going to change it to that Calcim Pro that we just downloaded. Again, if you don't have the Calcim Pro or you weren't able to download it, you can use Athleus regular instead. But if you can, use the Calcim Pro. Okay, next up is once you have the font changed, we're going to go ahead and we want a more stylized S. So I'm just going to select this S here, and on my computer you can see it's already giving me some different options for how I may want this S to look. So if I click on that first option, it gives me this really fancy version of the S, which frankly just looks unrecognizable. But I'm just going to highlight it, and then I'm going to go into the font family, which is this drop down below the actual font name. If you're up in the control panel, it's that second drop down right there. But in the character panel, I'm going to go to the font family, and I'm going to select bold italic instead of regular. And it just looks a little bit nicer, but it's still readable. That's important. That other decorative S that I just showed you was, you could barely tell it was an S. This, it looks nice, it's decorative, but it's still very clearly an S. So again, this is just bold italic. Next is we're just going to zoom in on the quote over here, and I'm going to select the entire thing. You can either click and drag to select it. You can hit Command A or Control A, or if you click in the paragraph 4 times, it should select the entire thing. So I'm going to go into my character panel, and I'm going to make sure that I have the settings the way I want. So I'm going to change the font to Adobe Caslon regular. I want to set the style to bold italic. I want the size set to 24. And I want the leading set to 35. And the leading controls how much space is between each character vertically. So that's another way to get some more space between your lines. Except what we did earlier, it was concerned with paragraph breaks. This concerns itself with actual characters when it makes its calculations. Next is I'm going to go into this flyout option, and I'm going to go to open type. And you'll see all these different options over here. This is what I was talking about earlier with open type, is it has a lot more options for its characters than what is on your keyboard, and sometimes it has multiple options for multiple letters. So like right now, swash is selected. If I turn that off, you'll see the Y changes. What I'm going to do is I want swash on. I'm also going to turn on discretionary ligatures, and you'll notice that it adds that tail onto the T there. This just makes it look a bit fancier. Next up is I'm going to go down into this empty frame down here. I'm going to put my cursor in there, and then I'm going to go to type and glyphs. Glyphs are these special characters that aren't necessarily on your keyboard, but they are loaded into the particular font. So I'm going to go to ornaments, and under where it says show, I'm going to click ornaments in that drop down, and it should give you these options. If it doesn't give you these options, make sure your font is set to the Minion Pro. And I want this heart circle thing, and if I double click that, it should add it to the frame. I want this to be bigger and play a bigger role into the design, so I'm going to select it, and I'm just going to move glyphs down because we're going to use it again here in a sec. And if I go to Windows Properties, you can change things like the fill and stroke, or you can just go up into your control panel and change them up here as well. So first thing I want to change is the fill. I want that set to strawberry red. and the stroke is going to be that stem green. And then just make sure that the stroke is set to 1. And then go ahead and change the font size to 122, so that way it's nice and big. There we go. Alright, next up is I want to move over back to the recipe here. And you can see that the way our fractions are set up right now is it's just typed out with 1/2. I want this to actually have a fraction where it's one number over the other. It's just going to look a bit more professional. So I'm going to highlight this 1/2 here. And I'm going to go back to Glyphs. And I'm going to change this to numbers. And you should see it gives me some options for some of the more common fractions that are used. So I want to select the 1/2, double click on it, and it should replace that with a 1/2 symbol rather than just having it typed out. I'm going to do that again for the second 1/2. And I'm going to do that for the 1/4 as well. Alright, so we should be done with Glyphs. And you'll notice that when we changed the spacing for our lines, it gave us that overset error and everything doesn't quite fit in the box like it should. I want to add a second column over here, so it'll put the nutritional facts over here, and over here you'll have the ingredients and the directions. So there are two ways to do this. You can either go to Object, Text Frame Options, or you can right click in the frame and go to Text Frame Options from here as well. And I want to change the column number to 2. Make sure that your gutter is set to 0.25. And that should be everything. Just hit OK. And you'll notice that it still kind of sections the information up in a weird way. We're going to fix that here in a sec by creating a straddle head. A straddle head is basically it's going to put a row that spans over how many columns we have. So like right now we have 2, so it will span across both of these columns, and it'll give us a nice place to put our title, so that way it's one long line instead of bunched up over to the left here. So I'm going to grab my type tool, make sure my cursor is in the chocolate covered strawberries. And you can either go to paragraph, or if you have the control panel up here, there should be an option over here. We're going to go to span columns, or if you're in the paragraph panel, you can go to span columns right there. And where it says paragraph layout, we're going to change that to span columns. Make sure it's span to all. And you shouldn't have to change everything else. And if you have preview on, you should see that chocolate covered strawberries gets shifted into its own row over top of everything. That saves you from having to add an extra frame to have everything laid out. Okay, so next up is I want where it says nutritional facts to actually be with the nutritional facts. So we're going to do like what we did with the grid, where we had the grid of pictures, and underneath it we had corresponding text, and we wanted the text to not be broken up weirdly and to be in each column. So I'm going to put my cursor right before the end there, and I'm going to right click, insert break character, insert column break, so that way it should move everything over into the next column. And if I go back over here, you'll notice that there is a space underneath the about 30 minutes. Go ahead and just hit backspace on it, so that way if you're at the end of 30 minutes and you hit the right arrow, it should go straight over to nutritional facts. That's important because of some of the formatting we're going to do over on this left side here. Right, so for right now, I'm going to go up to the top here and go to a bite of delight. And I want to change the alignment so that way it's in the center of the frame. So you can either go to the paragraph panel and click that option here, or if you're up in the control panel, you can click it right there. And it should move everything over into the center. I'm going to go down back to this frame here and change the chocolate covered strawberries so that way it's in the center. You can either click the button like we did up at the top, or if you want the shortcut, if you're on Mac, it'll be Command Shift C. If you're on Windows, it'll be Control-Shift-C. And we want to go ahead and center the quote as well. Next up is I'm going to go over into the heart-shaped fruit paragraph, and you'll notice that it has what's called like a rag or a ragged edge, and that just means that the way that the sentences are broken up is it's not filling the space all the way to the edge, and it's kind of creating the stair-step effect. Sometimes you'll want that in a design. Sometimes you'll want the words to go right up to the edge of your frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that information in there, and I want to go to justify with last line aligned left. If you're in the control panel, it'll be this button here. If you're in the paragraph panel, it'll be the fourth button from the left. And you'll notice that it brings the sentences and it brings the words all the way to that very edge, so it creates a very nice clean rectangle. Sometimes you want this, sometimes you don't. It really just depends on the design you're working with. For this particular design, I want that nice solid square, so I'm going to leave it like that. But you'll see that when it creates that straight line, it has the hyphens in that calculation. So it's using the hyphens to create that edge. Sometimes you'll want, in order to create a better flow, you might want the letters to be creating the edge rather than the punctuation, like hyphens, commas, things like that. So I'm, with that still selected, I'm going to go to Type and Story. And I want to turn on optical margin alignment. And I'm going to make sure it's set to 14. And you should see that it moves those punctuation marks, like the commas or the hyphens, to outside the frame. So that way that straight edge is created by the letters themselves and not the special characters or the punctuation. Next up is I want to create a drop cap. A drop cap is something you might see in certain texts where the very first letter is much bigger than the rest of the text, or it's more decorative than the rest. So what you're going to do is put your cursor in this first paragraph. Make sure it's in the same paragraph as the heart-shaped fruit, because we don't want to add a drop cap to every single paragraph, just that very first one. So back in the paragraph panel, if you go down to the bottom here, you'll notice there's a drop cap number of lines. It'll be in that first column, last one there. This controls how many lines the drop cap spans. So you'll notice as I go up, I have it set to 2 and it's going down 2 lines. If I go up to 3, it's spanning 3, and so on and so forth. Usually you don't want it too big, so we're just going to set it to 2. And then you'll notice a box next to it. That controls how many letters it affects. So right now it's just set to 1, so it's going to affect the H in heart. But if we wanted it to affect the entire word, we could do that. Or if you just want to affect part of the word, you can. We're going to go ahead and leave that at 1, so it's just affecting the heart, or the H in heart. Alright, since this is so much bigger, I'm going to go ahead and add a fill to it. I just want to select the H in heart. And I'm going to go up into my control panel, make sure you're in the character formatting section. And I'm going to go to the fill menu. So make sure you're selecting that top square, not the bottom one. And I'm going to change that to stem green. And it should have changed the inside color for you. Next is I'm going to go back up to a bite of delight, and I'm going to select everything. And I'm going to mess with the kerning and the tracking. Now, kerning and tracking are very similar, and they can achieve very similar looks, but there is a difference. Tracking is concerned with the spacing located within an entire block or an entire paragraph of text, whereas kerning is only concerned with the spacing between 2 individual characters. So tracking would affect, in this case, a bite of delight. Kerning would affect only, with the way I have it selected right now, the B and the I. So I'm going to select the entire thing because first thing we're going to change is the tracking. So I'm going to go into my character panel and I want to find tracking. And if you look here, it should be in the second column, second drop down. And we're going to change that to 100. Should notice it should space everything out. And then I'm going to go down into strawberries. I'm going to select the entire thing. And I want to change that tracking to -20. So that way it'll bring things a little closer together. But you can see with the way it's set up now is because this is a different style than the rest of the word, is the spacing's a bit off, and you can see that there's more space around the S than there is between like the T and the R and the A. So I want to change just the spacing between the S and the T. So I'm going to change my kerning, which is this option over here, and I want to set that to -60 because there's so much space between the two. And you should notice that it brings the T and the rest of the word in towards that S, so it fits a bit more snugly, and it looks less like that S. It's its own special character off to the side. So next is I'm going to go down here into this big chunk of paragraph, and I want to mess with my hyphenation settings. I'm going to select everything, and then either in the paragraph panel over here into the flyout menu, or if you're in the control panel, you can go up there and just click those lines off to the top right. Either way, we're going to go down to hyphenation. I'm going to preview on so you can see what happens. You can turn hyphenate on and off to see what your text looks like without it. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on. And we're going to go to the hyphen limit. The hyphen limit controls how many hyphens you'll see in a row. So right now it's set to 3. So that means you won't see more than 3 hyphens next to each other. We want to turn that down, so we're going to set that to 2, so that way there will be no more than 2. So I'm happy with that, and I'm just going to hit OK. You probably won't notice anything because of the way that the text is set up, but for bigger projects that can come in handy. Next is I'm going to go down back to the quote, and I'm going to put my cursor in front of, because the way it's set up now, I don't really like how each line has multiple words except for the last one. It just kind of throws off the look. So I'm going to hold down Shift Enter, and that's going to add a manual line break. The reason you want to add a manual line break rather than just hitting Enter and just doing a full line break is because we still want the of P's to be part of the same paragraph as the rest of the sentence there. And if we were to go mess with paragraph styles, if we have the manual line break turned on, then the paragraph style will affect everything here. If we just hit Enter and just did a hard break, then it's going to think these two are 2 separate paragraphs, and we'd have to apply the paragraph style twice. So again, just go ahead, put your cursor in front of the hit Shift Enter, and move it on to the next line. Next up is we're going to go over to Nutritional Facts. And we're going to select everything from serving size to protein 0 grams. And what we want to do is basically we want to format this so that way the text stretches across the column. And also we want to put some dots between the word and the number. And rather than just manually just saying period space, we want the program to do the hard work for us. So have that selected, and we're going to go to Type, Tabs. This is where you'd also go if you were wanting to add a hanging indent to something. So like if you're doing like a works cited page, this is how you'd make it. Go ahead and hit this right justified tab. Type in the 2 into X. And then put a period space. If for some reason it doesn't work right off the bat. This can sometimes happen if you've messed with some settings or if you've gone back and forth between the two. Go ahead and just click. You'll notice there's an itty bitty little triangle up top here. Go ahead and click on that, and we want the X value for it to fall on the 2. So it's going to go across the width here. And I want the leader to be a period, space, and it should add those dots. If you see something that looks more like this, make sure after your period you put a space. That way we don't have quite as nearly many dots and they have a bit more breathing room. So once we're happy with that, is we want to add a numbered list over here to the directions. So that way there's a bit more differentiation between the ingredients list and the actual directions. So I'm going to select everything here, and then I'm going to go to Window and Properties. Now you might have to drag this panel down to see more options, or you can just scroll down, find bullets and numbering, and select that second object. That's the numbered list option. And it should move everything over and add numbers to each direction. Okay, next up is if we go over to this frame here, you'll notice there's not a whole lot aside from the color that makes the title pop from the rest of the information down here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my cursor up in chocolate covered strawberries. And I'm going to go over to my paragraph panel and I'm going to turn on shading. What that does is it adds a color along the same row as the text there. That will just help make it pop a bit more. Make sure you change the color to strawberry red. And that just saves you from having to make a completely extra frame to add that color there. Everything here is still connected, but you still have that differentiation between the two. Next up is I'm going to go up to the Bite of Delight. And I want to add a paragraph rule to it. Basically what that means is we're just going to add a line underneath the Bite of Delight to add a bit more decoration to it. So go back over to the paragraph panel and find paragraph rules. And make sure it's set to rule below and turn rule on. And we want the weight to be set to 8. We want the color to be stem green. And with the rule on, you should notice all this stuff changing up here and with the preview turned on. So change type to white diamond. Change the width instead of column to text. Right now it's using the entire width of the frame to figure out how many diamonds there should be. If we change that to text, it'll just fit it to whatever is written there. Change offset to 0.0625. And that should be the only thing you need to change, so make sure all of your settings match this. And then hit OK. And there you go. The reason you would want to do this decorative line this way rather than just going over to your stroke and making a line this way is this line is always going to be set to the text above it. So like if I were to add in some extra words here, you can see that the line goes to match what I have typed up here, whereas the line that I created with the stroke, it just stays as is. There isn't a live relationship between the two. Once we've done all that, our paragraph or our page should look like this, and I can go into my presentation mode and I can look at it and see what my design looks like without all the frames on it and without the InDesign menus and stuff floating all around it. So this is what your project should look like. Just go ahead and name it as your last name, _prac5, and then just turn it into canvas.